This one is Justine Blanchet and Michelle Pilz, and they are going to talk about reproductive health privacy. We got topics coming at us left, right, and center. Justine's a partner at Field Law. She provides risk management advice and litigation defense to healthcare sector owners, operators, and employees. Stand by. And Michelle is a civil litigator at Field Law with a focus on health law defense. She advocates for healthcare providers and their staff in a range of complex legal matters, including medical malpractice, negligence, and professional regulatory bodies. So please welcome to the stage as we talk about reproductive health policy and privacy. Here is Justine and Michelle.
Good morning and thank you. And please do take your bathroom breaks, they're important. So I'm Justine and this is my colleague Michelle, and we're really happy to be here today. And frankly, I don't blame you if you're leaving while the lawyers come on. So our presentation is called The Hidden Cost of Convenience, Navigating Health Data Choices. And I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to my articling student, Mara Sterling, who helped put these slides together for us today. And she came up with this snappy title. So thank you, Mara. These are a couple cute pics of us that you've seen already. And as Leslie mentioned, we spend our days working with healthcare clients, defending litigation, appearing at administrative tribunals, providing risk management advice and guidance to clients who are navigating the intersection of law and medicine. And I'm a partner in the health law group at Field, and Michelle is one of my senior associates, and we work together really closely all the time. And so because we are lawyers, we have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer. Today's presentation is not legal advice, and we are not your lawyers today or after today, unless you specifically retain us to be. Today, what we are going to do is give you a little bit of legal information to help you think about and navigate the framework in which reproductive health technology and health data tracking operate, and hopefully to give you some critical thinking skills about how to deal with some of these larger issues. So we want to start off with a quote from Dr. Stephanie Felsberger, who is a sociologist and health technology researcher at the University of Cambridge. And Dr. Felsberger's research is really interesting because she has been looking at this issue of the intersection of women's health, technology, data, tracking, and some of the sociological and privacy implications for a long time. So we know that digital products, services, technologies, and other types of apps that are focused on promoting women's health and well-being are referred to as femtech, and those were valued at $22 billion in US dollars, not Canadian dollars, in 2020, and that figure is expected to reach over $60 billion by 2027. So medical data is typically much more valuable to prospective purchasers because it provides more comprehensive insights into an individual as opposed to traditional personal information. And anecdotally, we know that medical data can sell for 50 times higher than credit card information on the dark web because of this. So data collection isn't all that bad, though. In fact, having access to your data and your information can be a really good thing. It can give you and your healthcare providers important information about your health status, and it can help you monitor, track, and plan for the future. So it's not the collection of the data in and of itself that is bad, but it's just important to know what's being done with it. And it's also not a bad thing to choose to share your health information. It's just important that you understand the choices that you are making and how those choices affect your privacy and legal rights. So we have a jam-packed agenda for you, because we have a lot to cover. So we're going to start by giving you a little Contracts 101 primer to give you a basic understanding of how it is that you might enter into these online agreements that govern the use of your information. We're going to give you a brief overview of the applicable provincial and federal legislation, and then we want to talk to you about some of the potential risks associated with health information tracking. And then finally, we want to give you some practical tips on how to potentially mitigate and manage these apps and wearables in your life.
All right, so let's start with basics. At its core, a contract is simply a formal, legally binding agreement between two people that creates obligations in law that are enforceable. Contracts don't have to be fancy to count. They can be written, oral, they can be electronic. What really matters is that to be enforceable, that they have three essential elements, and that is an offer, an acceptance, and consideration. So first, an offer is just a clear statement upon setting out the terms upon which one party is willing to contract with the intention that it be accepted by the other party. So really, in effect, what it's saying is a party is saying, here are my terms, are you willing to agree to them? Next is acceptance, and acceptance has to meet two basic principles to meet the parameters of exception, and that is it has to be unequivocal and it has to be communicated to the other party. So you can't just silently accept a contract in your head. You do actually have to communicate it to the person providing the offer to you. The third element is consideration, and this is often the trickiest concept, but really what it is the exchange of something of value between parties. It's really what motivates parties to enter into an agreement. So for example, with an online platform like Facebook, users are providing access to personal data in exchange for access to Facebook, its platform, and its services. The point to take away is that online contracts or electronic contracts are essentially treated the same way as traditional written contracts. The format might be a bit different, but the essential elements of a contract still apply.
So let's briefly go over some of the legislation that governs the use, collection, and disclosure of health information in Canada and specifically in Alberta. And honestly, this topic is a whole lecture in and of itself, and frankly, reading legislation is pretty boring. So my goal today is to just point you in the right direction, to give you the tools to take a look at the laws that actually govern your information where you live. So the three pieces of legislation I want to talk to you about are the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, which that rolls off the tongue. So we often refer to it as PIPEDA. It's a federal piece of legislation that supports and promotes electronic commerce by protecting personal information that is collected, used, or disclosed in certain circumstances. And all businesses that operate in Canada and handle personal information are subject to this legislation. PIPEDA defines personal information as any factual or subjective information, recorded or not, about an identifiable individual. So what does that mean? Well, it can include things like your age, your name, your ID numbers, your income, your ethnic origin, or your blood type. It could also include things like opinions, evaluations, comments, social status, employee files, credit card information, medical records, consumer practices, etc. PIPEDA requires that individuals have knowledge of and consent to the collection, use, and disclosure of their personal information, except in certain circumstances. And consent can take various forms, including a checkbox or an application form. And personal information must not be used or disclosed for purposes other than for those for which it was collected, except with the individual's consent or as required by law. The information has to be retained only for as long as necessary to fulfill the purposes for which it was collected, and the personal information must also be protected by security safeguards which are appropriate to the level of the information being collected. Now, we also have the Personal Information and Privacy Act, or PIPA, which is Alberta's private sector privacy law for provincially regulated organizations such as businesses and sometimes even nonprofits. It has a lot of the similar provisions as PIPEDA and applies to any organization that collects, uses, or discloses personal information in the province. Finally, we have the Health Information Act, which we call HIA. It's an Alberta piece of legislation that governs the collection, use, and disclosure of personal health information in this province. It only applies to health information, but that definition can be broader than you think. It provides a framework around situations where consent is required and sometimes where consent is not required, but it only applies to health information being managed by a health custodian. But the biggest takeaway from this legislative review is that if an individual consents to the collection, use, or disclosure of their information through some kind of contract, like we've talked about, online or otherwise, then most of the safeguards that are in these pieces of legislation will not apply because you've already agreed to letting go of it. So how is health data collected? Well, it can be collected in a variety of ways. It can be collected through healthcare providers like doctor's appointments, mental health services, or other paramedical providers like your chiropractor or your physio, through clinical services like blood tests, imaging, genetic testing, etc. All of these interactions generate data and generate information. You could be contacted through a public health survey, and also you could do it yourself by putting information into an app, a wearable, a website that is tracking possibly your personal health information. So this slide gives you a visual representation of the data collection life cycle, which necessarily includes collection, retention, storage, and data sharing. And sometimes we will see that data is not just stored on an individual device, but more often than not these days, it is stored on a cloud-based server, a third-party infrastructure, which is often outside of your province and usually outside of your country. So in the next few slides, we're going to look at some examples of how health data can be owned and accessed by third parties, advertisers, analytics companies, and even sometimes used for law enforcement or litigation purposes. We're going to talk to you primarily about 3 methods of data collection through the use of fertility apps, wearable devices, and also through cookies collected by websites.
All right, so data ownership and collection or and access rights. Now, the example that we chose to look at was the Flow Health app. Many of you might be aware of this app or use this app. So Flow is a period and fertility tracking app, and users are essentially sharing very sensitive health information, including menstrual cycles, pregnancy status, and sexual health data. In addition to the health information that Flow collects, it also automatically collects usage and technical data when you sign up and give consent. So that's information like how often an app is opened, the types of features that are used, device identifiers like information about your device, your model, the system software, location, so your IP address that'll give an approximate location as in the country that you're in, and just general interaction patterns. Now, according to Flow, the information is used to improve the app's functionality, to fix bugs, refine features, rather than to identify users individually. And to do all this and to collect this information, it uses cookies, and I'll talk a bit about cookies later. But when you join Flow and you give your consent, Flow then shares personal and technical data with its partners like AppsFlyer, and it does this to help promote its services. And once AppsFlyer has the information, it analyzes that information to help Flow improve its marketing campaigns. And it might also share, and in Flow's case, does share that information with partners like Google or Pinterest to reach you across similar platforms. Now, you can withdraw your consent at any time from AppsFlyer, but the proviso to that is that Flow uses AppsFlyer for a separate functional purpose related to onboarding between the website and the app. So you can't opt out of that data processing, and it is important to know that. The same sort of data collection applies to another one of its partners, and that's Firebase. Firebase analyzes the information it receives to help Flow optimize its marketing campaigns. But unlike Firebase, you can withdraw your consent from the use of that data or the dissemination of that data.
So we expect that most of you are familiar with wearable health devices, Apple Watch, Garmin, I've got one on. And our case study here is the Oura Ring. If you're not familiar, the Oura Ring is just like it sounds. It's a ring that you put on your finger, and it can monitor your health, sleep, fitness, biometrics, like heart rate. It can track your cycle. It can provide you with information about your period, your fertility windows, and family planning. And like the Flow app, Oura Ring's predictors are user inputted and frankly get better the more information that you put into the actual device. So like Flow, when you agree to Oura Ring's terms and conditions, you accept that your personal information is going to be tracked and used in certain ways. And here we have highlighted Oura Ring's information about privacy protection. And basically they are saying that they will take your personal data, they will anonymize it, they will aggregate it, and then at that point it no longer becomes personal and they can use it basically however they want. Typically these kinds of companies will use this data to learn more about their consumers, their needs, their spending habits, etc. And it might be the Oura Ring's actually quite good because they tell you exactly what information they are collecting and processing and what they're going to use it for. You just have to know where to find that. So they tell you that they sometimes process the data themselves and sometimes they rely on, quote, trusted third-party processors to process data, whatever that means. And this can also include online cloud service providers. So the reason it's important to know this information is that so you can understand some of the potential risks that you can be exposed to, which we'll talk about in a moment.
All right, so I mentioned cookies earlier. I want to get this right. So cookies are used to identify specific users and improve their web browsing experience. It's basically the internet's way of remembering who you are, so you don't have to log on to a website every time you go to it, or if you accidentally close a tab, you're not having to reload your shopping cart. You can delete or restrict cookies through your browser settings, but not all cookies are the same, and it's important to understand the difference. So first-party cookies are created by the website that you're actually visiting. These are generally lower risk, and they're there to make the website work, like logins or language settings. Third-party cookies, those come from outside companies, and these are the cookies that you want to pay attention to because these are the advertisers and the analytics providers. And these are the cookies that can track your activity across multiple websites, raising different privacy concerns. There's then essential cookies and non-essential cookies. And essential cookies are usually allowed without express consent because they're required to deliver the service that you asked for, so staying logged in or completing a transaction. Non-essential cookies, like third-party cookies, those fall under greater legal scrutiny and typically require user choice. And that's why now if you visit a Canadian website, you'll typically see a cookies banner because what it's meant to do is to provide the opportunity to provide informed consent to the user. All right.
Okay, so we want to talk to you about some of the risks of sharing your information, and I think they're probably pretty obvious, but we'll talk about one case study that maybe was less obvious. So honestly, the most important ones are privacy concerns and information misuse. So chances are that if you are engaging with any of these platforms, your information is being shared because you agreed for it to be shared, whether you actually realize that or not. Okay? When you click, I consent, I agree, or you scroll past all of those fine print terms and conditions, and you just wanted to log on to whatever you want to log on to, you've agreed to it. So what does that mean? Well, I mean, it means that your information can be sold to people who want to sell you things, some of which you might want, some of which you might not want. But you could also be subject to data leaks. And, data leaks are pretty prevalent in the media these days. Even the most robust online security doesn't prevent it. And we live in an online world, but it's something to be aware of when you are sharing, in particular, really personal, really private healthcare information or reproductive information. the consequence of all of this is that your information ends up on the dark web and that you are subject to identity fraud or theft otherwise. Other privacy concerns can sometimes be sharing information that you didn't actually intend to share. So things like your age, your health status, your gender, your other online community engagement. If any of you have a Peloton bike and you've consented to sharing your username and your age range and your medal status, like I have, then you know that you're actually sharing more about yourself with a global community than maybe you actually intended to. And then, finally, I think it's important that we think about other ways in which information can be misused. We're living in an unprecedented time, to put it lightly, where women's ability to make choices about their own healthcare decisions and their bodies are being challenged by political and state actors. So regardless of whatever your personal opinion is on that topic, I would just say that when a government or a legislature takes decision-making away from an individual citizen or consumer about their ability to make choices about their own body or future, it's the kind of things that we as individuals and as citizens should definitely take notice of. So at the end of the day, it doesn't mean don't do it. It just means make sure that you are making informed and good choices.
All right, so back to the Flow app for a moment. The Flow app has been heavily scrutinized for its collection and management of data over the past couple of years. And in 2016, US regulators found that Flow user health data had been shared with third-party providers in breach of its terms of service and privacy policy. That resulted in a class action in the United States, with Flow app users alleging that Flow had collected their information about menstrual cycles by embedding third-party tracking tools and then using it for targeted advertising. That class action settled out of court last year for $56 million. But interestingly, a Canadian class action lawsuit was commenced in BC in 2024. The allegations in that lawsuit are very similar to the US counterpart. Broadly speaking, Flow collected highly sensitive personal information, promised to keep that information confidential, and then intentionally shared that information with parties like Facebook. That legal action is still being litigated, but I wouldn't be surprised if it settled in a similar out-of-court settlement like the States. So I guess what's the takeaway from all of this? I think it's worth emphasizing that apps like Flow, the Oura Ring, they do come with a great deal of convenience. And the benefit of helping people track their reproductive cycles and manage their fertility is really unparalleled to anything we've seen before. And the core of the Flow app's functionality and other probably similar apps is that it really does depend on the amount and the type of information the user chooses to enter. And the more information you enter, the better the app will work. So the message here, like Justine said, it's not that the collection of data is bad, it's how it's used. But the Flow app situation really does highlight this broader privacy concern with health apps. Even if an app is free, users are essentially paying with their personal data. And unless privacy practices are crystal clear and they're strictly followed, there is a chance that sensitive health information is shared, it's leaked, or it's accessed by third parties to do things like profiling, targeted advertising, or in some cases for other secondary purposes that users would have no idea about. So that's the takeaway from the Flow Health app. It's not that you don't use it, it's just be aware of what you're putting into it. All right, and so finally, some mitigation strategies. What can we do to protect ourselves? We made a short list of things. There are lots of different things that you can do. But one thing that you can do is review your app's permissions. And I'm guilty of this. I don't do this often enough. But apps should only access what they actually need. So if you've downloaded a calculator and it wants your camera, your contacts, your microphone, your location, it's probably not doing math. It's spying on you. The other thing you can do is limit your location permissions. Your apps don't need to know where you are at all times. So set the permission to only while using the app. And that's a way to prevent it from tracking all your moves. Another one is to keep your apps up to date. So yes, updates are annoying, but they really are not optional because what they're doing for the most part is fixing security holes. So you do want to update them, but be sure if you do to check your settings afterwards because sometimes it can change the controls. The other thing, and this is what I did before, or while I was preparing for this presentation, was to delete unused apps. This protects you from having apps sitting in the background, sort of like digital freeloaders, collecting all this information and then sharing it when you're not even using the app. So do consider deleting apps. I think I deleted about 8 prior to coming here today. And lastly, the last 2 points, really consider what it is you're entering into a new account or a new app when you're signing up. If you're buying skincare, does the platform need to know your age? If you're signing up for a health fitness app, which I did recently, does it need to know your address? So I think the takeaway from that piece is just really think critically about what you're entering into the app. Does it actually improve functionality, or is it just possibly a means for them to improve their marketing campaigns?
So we just want to say a really big thank you for your attention today. We've really enjoyed sharing this information with you, and we want to thank the Women's Health Research Hub for inviting us to speak, and also to the Calgary Health Foundation and the O'Brien Institute for Public Health for supporting initiatives like this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That's some great information. You know, sometimes you can't get into, you can download an app, and unless, that doesn't need your address, but unless you put your address, it is not going to let you sign up for the app. And in which case, no, you don't need that app that badly, because that is information they don't have. That is information that they are going to use, and that is information that can take you down a bad road. So have we got any questions for the ladies? Here we go, right here at the front. Here, I'll come to you. I'm right here. I'm doing nothing.
Thank you very much. I was curious about the deleting the app. Even before you suggested that, I was wondering if you delete the app, is that enough, or can they still access your other data, or do you actually have to ask to retract the data? And second to that, when you're agreeing to these things, so you decide, yes, I want to do this anyway, do they have to provide information on how to retract, or do you need to do your own research for that?
Oh, good questions.
So we'll give you a good lawyer answer. It depends. On the first part of your question about deleting the apps, I mean, it depends on which app and what their terms and conditions state. In Canada, you are required to give information about your privacy rights in relation to your data on a given platform. Honestly, finding out that those terms and conditions can be a little bit tricky, and they change over time. So it's buyer beware, right? Like, you can go in, you can delete the app. I deleted Facebook for a period of time.
Oh, smart,
right? Yeah. And then I reactivated it because I needed to sell something on Marketplace, as one does.
Yep.
And lo and behold, I re-downloaded it, and everything was there like I'd never left. So
sketchy. Always thought those Facebook folks were sketchy. All right, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question.
You're a frequent questioner, aren't you?
I am. I have a lot of questions. There's a book full here. I'm sure everybody else is the same. When you log into these health apps, they give you a couple of options. You can either log in with an email using your Facebook profile or using your Google profile. I always use my email because I don't want it to be linked to Facebook or Google. And the second question I have is, what do you think about every single person who has an iPhone has a health app? And therefore, Apple is probably going to be one of the biggest holders of our health data.
That's a tough one. So for me personally, on my Apple, because I have an Apple Watch, I deleted the app because I use this watch to track my fitness, and so it's not actually linked to my app on my phone anymore. But And I have not done a great job of actually checking my settings on this. So again, it would be a similar answer to what Justine provided. It's buyer beware and have a look at the terms and conditions, because you're right, it probably is sharing your information. And certainly with the comment you made at the outset, when you're logging into new accounts, I do also use my email address because I don't want that link, which it would absolutely do. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but it's tough. I think the best thing to do is just to have a look at the terms and conditions and perhaps even delete that app on your phone if you're not interested in having it shared.
We can't even read the terms and conditions. They're so small. Go ahead.
Thank you. Some of these privacy concerns are not just from health apps, and I'm going to ask about an example. Just recently, I bought a new car, so I had to get new insurance. And the insurance company said, oh, well, we'll give you a 20% discount if you sign up for our app. When I went to enable it, it wanted to turn on location services, which absolutely makes sense. You want to know when my car is going faster than the speed limit, et cetera. And then the next question was that it wanted full access to my health data. And I'm like, why do you need to know what my blood pressure and my breathing rate is? Because of my insurance on my car. So I asked, how do I get that information from the insurance company about why you're collecting this information before I accept? And the person at the insurance company could not answer that question. So from a legal perspective, what are my options? How do I find out why you want this data before I consent to giving it to you?
Ooh, walk away, baby.
So, if you've ever heard the saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch, there's no such thing as a free lunch, maybe unless you register to get one today. But your insurer providing you a 20% discount, they most certainly are getting something in exchange for that, as you've learned. As the corporate provider, they should be able to tell you the reason why they need that information and whether you can, in fact, opt in or opt out. You may, I don't know, I'm not familiar with it. You may be able to, you may not be. But again, I think it's very astute of you to have noticed that, inputted that information, noticed it, responded, and then have questions. And like you said, if they can't answer your questions, then maybe you just don't take the discount.
Yeah, because nothing's free. Our information is currency. So, go ahead.
So just one other insurance question that has to do with health is how far away are we from a health score? There's the social scores that they have in other countries. How far away are we away from having a health score? And so similarly, a driving score that some AI has been able to be produced from all of this data.
You probably already have one, because if you're Googling symptoms, that's going somewhere. That information is going somewhere. I am not a lawyer, so I'll let the lawyers answer.
So it's hard to say. That would be most likely in Canada, that would be at a government level. So, if you're unaware, the way healthcare spending works in Canada is there are transfer payments by the federal government that are made to the provincial government, and the provincial government is responsible for administering healthcare within the province. So there is a federal act called the Canada Health Act, and then we have accompanying provincial legislation, which is currently undergoing a full overhaul. So I won't tell you the pieces of legislation because
We know there's corridors. There's corridors now.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Helpful corridors.
So it's hard to say, but I think you're right that this is a trend, right? This is a trend that we are, as a society, increasingly giving information to companies, to legislatures, to financial institutions, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. There are really great things that have happened from this, like, the fact that you even can track your cycle now and you can monitor for fertility windows, like, that's incredible. You think about people who have suffered from infertility for decades that would have just killed for that information, right? But it's all with a price. So, as you say, is a health score going to determine whether we have access to healthcare in the future, what kinds of access we have to healthcare, whether we pay for certain types of healthcare or not? These are all really open questions, and I'm not the decision maker on those.
If only we ruled the world. We have time for one more question up there.
Hi. So this is a little bit out of scope of what you talked about today, but I'm like, okay, there's 2 lawyers in the room. There's a room full of amazing women. And something that's already been kind of joked about a few times today, was even in the video, is that most of us in this room have looked at medical sexism right in the eye and have been laughed at and have been dismissed because of the lack of research and arrogance in the room. Like, are there people out there like making room for medical malpractice on the basis of sexism? Is that ever something that's going to happen? I mean, we can complain about it and laugh about it, but are there any legal frameworks for us actually to hold
what's going to get the actual attention?
Researchers and doctors who are dismissing us accountable. Maybe another topic someday, but just...
I mean, yes and no. There are human rights complaints that take place that will have similar allegations to what you're referencing here. So that would be one forum in which you could bring a medical malpractice complaint if you've been in a situation or a circumstance where you have been dismissed by a physician in a manner that you feel is gender-based. I haven't seen it in a broader or more like a class action context yet. But certainly with all of the movement and discussion that's taking place, it's something that could, who knows what could happen on the horizon. But for now, if that's something that you've experienced, the Alberta Human Rights Tribunal would be probably the most appropriate forum to bring a complaint of that nature.
It has to be on a protected ground to be admissible to the Human Rights Tribunal. So, things like age, disability, race, ethnic origin, gender. In terms of a larger systemic legal challenge to medical sexism, I guess my only comment there would be the way that we compensate people in our civil litigation system, so we're talking about civil law, not criminal law, is through money, right? We don't have any other way really to compensate people other than money. And when we live in a society where public health care dollars are so few and far between, are stretched so far thin, I'm not suggesting that it's not something that should be pursued, but my personal concern would be that, frankly, there might be some lawyers that would profit from a venture like that as opposed to truly making change in an already overtaxed, overburdened public healthcare system. So if you have a better idea, please let us know, because otherwise the options right now aren't great.
Well, louder voices, right? Louder voices and not putting up boundaries. We're not accepting anymore. We want civil treatment. We want to be heard. We want to be listened to, and we will not back down from this 50% of the population that is looking for treatment that is equitable to the other 50% of the population, and they get it without being loud about it. So being loud, taking up space, and using voices may be more impactful than the road through litigation. Okay, thanks, ladies. Hang tight for a second. That was all excellent. Really well done and really interesting. So do we have a QR code up here on the screen behind me? Okay, well, there's supposed to be. I can't do everything. But it is a survey. So you're going to find some on some of the posters around. And we want to hear your story. You've got an option to be anonymous. We want to hear women's health stories. And that is part of the movement towards asking, maybe demanding, equitable women's health. So we want to hear your story if you would like to share. So look for those. We're having a lunch break now. If you have a ticket for your lunch, you can get it up on the mezzanine there. There's also lunch options in the area. Make sure to put your name in the prize draw. There's lots of goodies that we're going to be giving away, and we're going to be giving those away this afternoon at 2:30. The next presentation is going to be at 12:50. I'm just looking for my phone because it's 12:25. You've got 25 minutes before we meet back here for another few presentations this afternoon. Thanks for being here this morning. If this is the last we see of you, otherwise we'll see you back here in half an hour.